Hi, I'm Ed Spevak. I'm curator of invertebrates. That means animals without backbones at the St. Louis Zoo. And I'm also director for the Center for Native Pollinator Conservation. So I deal a lot with pollinators, and particularly native bees, and their value and importance for us and for ecosystems. I can remember, you can ask a question or...
Yeah. How are bees important to our food web that the people depend on?
Bees are vitally important. 75% of all of our crop species worldwide depend upon pollinators, most of those being bees. You look at them economically, in the United States, over $29 billion of our food, at a minimum, is produced by bees and native bees. Now, you also have to think about, and I've just suddenly lost my train of thought.
You're still talking about how much money bees are responsible for.
Right.
Yeah.
So besides the economic value of the bees, if you think about what you eat, 1 out of every 3 bites of food that you take or drink depends upon pollinators, and most of those being bees. Now you may say, okay, 75%, 3/4 of our crops, but then only 1/3 of what we eat. That's because a lot of what we eat is corn, rice, wheat, barley. Those are grains which are wind pollinated. But the foods that are pollinated by bees are those which give us color, give us flavor, give us nutrients, give us vitamins. So without the bees, we really have no flavors, no taste for our food. If you wanted to just eat gruel, don't care about the bees. If you actually want some flavor and some color and some nutrition, care about the bees.
So tell us, what sorts of crops are in our food web that we eat that are pollinated by bees? Give us an example of maybe 4 or 5 things.
You can. There are
Or
a lot
10
of
things.
10 things. Almonds, zucchini, watermelon, oranges, apples, blueberries. Yeah, the list goes on and on. Basically everything except really corn, rice, wheat, barley, and oats. Everything else is going to depend upon pollinators. Those strawberries, those fruits, those nuts like almonds. If you like almonds, almonds are 100% dependent upon bees for pollination. If we had no bees, there would be absolutely no almonds whatsoever. So that's a crop which is 100% dependent upon bees. For other species like apples, it also means that you need to move pollen, which is basically a small grain which allows for the flowers to become pollinated to produce the fruits. You actually have to have 2 different apple trees, and you need something to take the pollen from one tree to another. It's the bees which are doing it. So the bees are moving the pollen from place to place, making sure that you have apples, that you have cherries, that you have strawberries, that you have all of these species in order to really nourish our bodies. But remember also, we're not the only ones which require these foods. It's everything from the bears to the birds to even the box turtle that you might find feeding on a ground strawberry. All of those depend upon the products of pollination, and most of that being done by bees.
So you're saying that if we had no bees, that a lot of the food webs would end up being in trouble?
They would end up being in trouble from a variety of things because they're really the base. We tend to think about plants as the base of any food web, but the way many plants reproduce is through pollination and by bees. So the plants couldn't reproduce, so eventually the plants would die out. Anything which feeds on those plants would die out. Anything feeding on those animals would die out. And even animals which rely on the shelter of a tree, to nest in, for birds to nest in. Many of those trees require bees and other pollinators to pollinate them so that you can have trees, so that you can have a forest. So for shelter, for food, for protection, besides just the food itself, just the necessities of life really depend upon pollinators.
Wow. Okay, so you're saying that many of the producers that are in our food web are dependent on bees. Well, what if I just want to eat hamburgers?
Well, let's take a general cheeseburger. So a cheeseburger, you've got a bun. Let's make it a sesame seed bun. So a sesame seed bun, we've got the burger on there. We've got cheese, lettuce, tomato, maybe some mustard, pickles. Okay, without the bees, you'd have the bun without sesame seeds, because all of the other things are pollinated. And I think, well, beef, well, cattle, You don't pollinate cattle. But we feed our cattle different types of hay which are pollinated, such as alfalfa hay and clover hay. So without those, you also wouldn't have the meat. And let's think about what you'd have with that burger, like a milkshake. Well, if you want to have a nice chocolate milkshake, say with some whipped cream on top, well, we feed our dairy cattle that clover and alfalfa hay, so you wouldn't have the milk, you wouldn't have the ice cream, you wouldn't have the whipped cream. The chocolate isn't pollinated by bees, it's pollinated by flies. So without those flies to pollinate the chocolate, you'd actually have nothing. And that cherry on top, which is pollinated by bees, you wouldn't have that either. So you'd have an empty glass with a straw and a bun, and that's it.
Wow. So it would really impact entire food webs drastically if the bees weren't around.
Right. Basically, a lot of the food that we like, and ice cream, pizza, burgers, all of those are really dependent upon that base, which is the pollinators, pollinating all those things. And for some species, it's also, they're part of the food web in that other species will eat them too. So there's a whole cycle around them that they really are the foundation. They're a keystone. They're, the brick in that arch which keeps it standing up.
So what can we do as just regular people in a city to help keep pollinators coming and to help them have healthy lives and help our food webs continue in a good way?
This is the great part. So say you wanted to save tigers or elephants. What do? You give to an organization that works with them, like the St. Louis Zoo or World Wildlife Fund, or you go to the zoo and support the zoo. Then you're done. Now, to help bees and other pollinators, you can do exactly the same thing, but you can also plant a garden. Plant a pollinator-friendly garden that blooms throughout the year from spring through fall. Cut back or don't use any pesticides, and make sure you have a lot of diversity of flowers. But one real important thing, one very simple thing, that even if you don't have a place to plant a garden, eat fruits and vegetables. Because if you're eating fruits and vegetables, that means that the farmers and orchardists have to produce those, which means that they also have to ensure that those pollinators are around. So just the simple fact of eating fruits and vegetables will actually help pollinators, because we have to have the pollinators to produce them. So you can plant a garden and eat your fruits and vegetables.
All right. Well, thank you. And we really appreciate having this interview with you. Where can kids find out more if they want to find out more about pollinators and our food web?
There are a number of good sources. One is the St. Louis Zoo's website. Go to our conservation section of the zoo's website looking for downloadable bee guides, bumblebee guides, and other information. The Xerces Society, which is XERCES, has a number of pieces of downloadable information. And Pollinator Partnerships, which is pollinator.org, also has a lot of good references that you can download for information on pollinators and how to plant a garden. And there's actually now some apps for iPhones and Androids, which plants to plant to attract different types of pollinators.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome.